Ayesha Kajee, who's one of the founding members of the Right2Know campaign. Launched in August 2010, the Right2Know campaign is growing into South Africa's first post-apartheid movement centered on freedom of expression and access to information. They are a democratic, activist-driven campaign that strengthens and unites citizens to raise public awareness, mobilize communities, and undertake research and targeted advocacy that aims to ensure the free flow of information necessary to meet people's social, economic, political, and ecological needs and live free from want, inequality, and indignity. Ms. Kajee holds a bachelor's degree in biological sciences, a postgraduate higher diploma in education, and qualifications in TEFL and computer programming. From 2004 to 2005, Ms. Kajee organized and facilitated seminars in Ghana, Kenya, Rwanda, Namibia, Malawi, Mauritius, and Angola. On the NEPAD project, she developed and coordinated a media training program held at the Institute every 6 months. Ms. Kajee was involved in an intensive research study on governance commissioned by the Malawi government during 2004 and similar studies on Mauritius and Ghana during 2005. She's also participated in events organized by the World Bank, the UN Economic Commission for Africa, IDEA International, and the Development Policy Management Forum. Without further ado, I introduce Ayesha Kajee.
Good morning, everybody. That's a pretty old bio and one that kind of embarrasses me, so I try to ignore most of it except the stuff about the Right2Know campaign. It's from my days at SIA, and that's a long time ago. I'm here to talk about the policy impact, the policy input of the Right2Know campaign. And I must tell you right now, this was a very last minute thing. I don't have a formal PowerPoint presentation or stuff like that, okay? And it's been a pretty hectic week for me. So if my thoughts aren't too ordered, stop me and ask, all right? The Right2Know campaign, as Shazia said, began or was formally launched in August 2010. And I just want to, I'm going back to that history because I want to give you a context of when it was launched. I had, a few months prior to that, come into the Freedom of Expression Institute as their director. The Freedom of Expression Institute was set up during the apartheid time to promote freedom of expression, which then later became one of the founding values and principles of our constitution. It had been without a director for a while, but it was a very, very politically tense time for the basket of expression rights in South Africa. Now, why am I saying basket of expression rights? Because I, for one, and certainly when I was at the FXI, the Institute, did not believe that freedom of expression was only about, as many people think, freedom of the media and academic freedom. You know, when you think of freedom of expression, most people think media freedom, academic freedom, and that's it. Okay. It's about far, far more than that. It's about the right to information or access to information. What in many countries is called FOI, freedom of information. Okay. It's also about the right to protest. Okay. Because if you are free to express yourself, then you must be free to protest peacefully. Okay. So it's about this basket of rights. Can you see where I'm coming with now? Coming from with this thing of basket. Okay, so it's about the right to process, it's about the right to or access to or freedom of information. And it's also, of course, about media freedom and academic freedom, etc., etc. Now, why do we say this was a very tense time for the basket of expression rights in South Africa? Well, in May that year, the ANC-led caucus in government proposed for the second time, or re-proposed, the idea of what they were calling a media what was it, Media Something Tribunal, MAT. But basically they were proposing government oversight of our media. So government oversight of the print and audiovisual media. Okay. Media Something Tribunal, can't remember. Sorry, I'm having a senile moment there. Okay. All right, so they proposed that in May, and there was a huge discussion, obviously, about it. Because in South Africa, we don't currently have public oversight of the media sector, except in so much as we have a Broadcasting Complaints Commission and we have a press ombudsman, etc. But those are mostly private or quasi-private organizations or bodies. Okay, so the Media Tribunal was the one big thing that came up. The other thing, of course, was what was then called the Protection of Information Bill, okay, which later became the Protection of State Information Bill, which R2K successfully popularized as, and you've probably heard this one, the Secrecy Bill. Okay, so those were the two big issues on our agenda. There were also other things like ICASA, the Independent Communications Regulator, wanting to regulate how private and public media organizations, audiovisual media organizations, were basically operating, etc. But those were smaller things. These were the two big things on the agenda, say mid-2010. And so a group of us who worked in one or more of these spheres began to talk about a popular mass movement and the need for a mass movement, for people to come out on the streets as they used to do in the 1970s and 80s, to actually oppose these types of things. So what was the Secrecy Bill? What was the Protection of Information Bill? Does anybody know? Yes.
Did it propose that publications aren't allowed to publicize certain state information because the state wanted certain things to not be available for public knowledge?
That was part of it. Okay, so that, for example, media would not be able to publish, say, a South African version of the Panama Papers, okay, if that belonged to the government. But it wasn't just about state information, but that was a big part.
Was it also whistleblower, like limiting, making whistleblowing illegal?
Making whistleblowing illegal. So if I worked, say, for the Department of Trade and Industry, okay, and I knew that Oak Bay Investments had a big stake in the proposed nuclear power development. You all know about Oak Bay. I hope you've been reading. Okay. And I knew that. And I knew that it was because Oak Bay had a big potential stake in the proposed nuclear power generation plant. That is why government was pushing ahead with that, despite the safety issues around it, despite the cheaper alternatives available. I know Furiel was here yesterday, so I hope some of that is coming back into your head. Okay, so I'm working for DTI and I know all these things, and I have access to some of the papers that show the collusion between the private sector, which is closely linked to a senior politician, and the policy on nuclear energy, which is being pushed through by the incumbent government. And I decided, hang on, this is not right. This is not right when millions of our people are starving, living homeless, etc., etc., etc. So I decided I'm going to be a whistleblower. I'm going to give this information out to the media, send it out to a whole lot of people, or to one particular source. It depends on how I want to do this. But I'm going to actually stand up and say, I'm not allowing this to happen on my watch, because I have a responsibility here. That may not be my responsibility in my job, but it's my social justice responsibility. What the Protection of Information Bill would have done is it would have made me a criminal, liable to very heavy fines, and liable to up to 15 or 20 years in jail. Initially it was even more. So just for spreading that information. Yet our Constitution explicitly states that citizens have the right to access information on public policy and government decisions that may affect their lives or the quality of their lives. Okay. So I'm not coming from nowhere. The other thing the Protection of Information Bill in its original incarnation would have done was it would not only have made state information secret, it would have also made certain types of corporate information secret. And again, liable to prosecution, etc. Okay. So for example, let's take that same example I was going with earlier. Okay. If somebody at Oak Bay Investments had decided to be the whistleblower, even though they were not working for government, they could have been prosecuted under the same law. Okay. Thirdly, if Shagufta, I'm picking on her because I know her name, I don't know most of your names, all right? If Shagufta was the journalist that the whistleblower, either from the government or the private sector, went to, she could have been prosecuted, and the media organization which she worked for could have been prosecuted. Okay. There were also other things around the Protection of Information or the secrecy law. Things like, for example, very long periods for declassifying information that was either labeled classified, secret, or top secret. There are various degrees of classification within the state. And yes, there is a necessity for some information to be classified, for some information to be secret. The type of information, for example, that could leave us as a country vulnerable to attack on our borders. Nobody's saying that type of information ought not to be only available to a very small number of people. But the way the Protection of Information Bill was worded, especially originally, was that it would have allowed almost any minister, any head of a government department, any director of a government department, or a person that minister or director designated, so even if they designated a clerk somewhere, it would have allowed any of these people to classify any information that they deemed was a threat to state security, without having to show how that information would be a threat. Okay. Question?
Yes. Hi.
Hi. I saw a hand on that side. Sorry.
I want to know, do any of these bills then contradict or contravene the PAIA, the Public Access to Information Act, at all?
Yes. I'm coming to PAIA now. Okay, but good question. All right, what is PAIA? PAIA is the Promotion of Access to Information Act, which on paper is a pretty good act. If you guys will come with me, I'm just going to get, hopefully, a better marker. There we go. Okay, so the Promotion of Access to Information Act, on paper it's a pretty good act, it's a pretty good law. It says that any citizen of the Republic, in any capacity, with justification and providing some reasons for wanting that information, can put in a request for information about just about anything that government or a private individual or a private organization is doing. And that particularly in government, there is a responsibility to respond within a specific time, either with the information or giving reasons why that information may not be provided to the citizen or organization that requests it. Okay. So it's an act that on paper is what we call a FOI law, a Freedom of Information law. Okay. It allows citizens, organizations, community organizations, NGOs, academics, journalists, other media people to request information on certain things, particularly in the public domain, but as I said, also to some extent in the private domain. Okay. How it works is that each government department or ministry needs to have what they call an information officer. So you put in the request, there's a form, and it's quite an easy one. It looks intimidating, but it's not. You put in a request to that department, and within 60 days, generally, they've got to respond. Sometimes they have a little bit longer, depending on the type of information that's requested. If they haven't responded within 60 days, you can basically institute legal proceedings against them, or in theory. It doesn't happen very often. If they don't respond within 60 days, or if they respond within 60 days and refuse you access to the information, you have further recourse in that you can then go higher up the chain of command in that department. So, as I said, on paper it's a good law. In practice, not a very good one, because the so-called information officers in many of those departments don't know how the law works. And one of Right2Know's education campaigns has been trying to educate the information officers that we really, in departments and municipalities, because we operate at all levels, right? That where the information officers obviously don't know the law and don't know how to do that part of their job. They may have other things to do, but if they've been designated information officers, then they really should know about PAIA. On PAIA, just in case I forget, if anyone's particularly interested, we often hold PAIA training, okay? And some of our partner organizations, particularly people like SAHA, the South African History Archives, okay, and ODAC, the Open Democracy Advice Center in Cape Town, hold PAIA training quite often. So if you want to know specifically how to use PAIA, that's a very good, it's about a 3/4 day workshop to go and attend, and they're usually free or very low cost. Okay, so well worth going to, especially if you intend working either in government or in the NGO sector or in the media. So, how does PAIA relate to the POIB, or the POSIB as it's now called, the secrecy bill? Well, if the secrecy bill classifies things or makes it possible for people to classify things fairly easily, then it directly contradicts the underlying principle of PAIA, the freedom of information, okay, and the principle of freedom of information. So, yeah, those are a couple of things. That's how, to go back to where I was. That's how Right2Know was founded. We launched in August 2010, both in Cape Town and then in Joburg. Joburg here at Wits, in the law school, although the law school is not part of Right2Know. When we started Right2Know, we were probably about 6 people who were really pushing this agenda and trying to get partners on board. And when we started envisaging the organization, one of the things we were very, 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 very clear on was that we didn't want to become an NGO in the general sense of the word. We didn't want to become a very formalized, highly structured. We've had to become a more formal, more structured organization. But we didn't want to become an organization that was started by middle-class people and largely consisting of middle-class people. We also were very, very wary of who was going to fund us and what influence that funding would bring. Okay. So we decided initially that we would operate as a loose umbrella organization, and that pretty much our primary focus at the time was going to be what we then got to be called the secrecy bill, okay, and to a lesser extent the media tribunal. Okay. And so we got together partner organizations, we invited them through, I was, as I said then, at the Freedom of Expression Institute, and we had there something called the Freedom of Expression Network, which were very grassroots based, again loosely based associations of people in different communities interested in the basket of expression rights, or who had local struggles that were directly linked to expression rights or information rights. So, for example, the Soweto Electricity Crisis Committee, we had a lot of their members on our FXN network in Soweto, because they were directly involved with a social justice issue that basically spoke to their inability to get information from government because of secrecy laws, because of classification. Similarly, the Temelihle Residents Association, okay, or the anti-eviction campaign in the Western Cape, the Glebelands hostel people in KwaZulu-Natal, okay. So these were all local struggles, very, very localized struggles that had a freedom of expression or a freedom of information component that made them good candidates to be partners on the ground. And so what we did when we launched R2K was we tried to get a lot of community activists and people involved in different spheres of activism at local levels involved. And I think that has been one reason it has been so difficult for this government to actually paint us with the same brush that they've painted many other organizations. You had Mark Hayward here recently as well, yesterday. Okay. We used, to some extent, we used the TAC model and the model that Section 27 is then built on. Okay. We used that model of really getting people together, listening to what their concerns were, and then leveraging with them their concerns and our potential policy input. And it becomes a very, very powerful model. I don't know if you see that, because you have, on the one hand, you have the people who envisaged it at first, who wanted to oppose the media tribunal. Of course, a lot of journalists in there. The people who were worried about secrecy, people like me who was then heading an NGO whose mandate this was. Okay. So you had people who had the legal background, the journalistic background, the professional background, if you will, and some of the research skills. But what we did was we married that to the people who had real experience at a very basic level, at a level of social justice, of accessing housing or accessing healthcare, okay, who could not do so because their expression rights, their protest rights, their freedom of information rights had in one way or another been arrogated or abrogated. And I think that marriage of the local with the kind of theoretical and philosophical and ideological was and still is a very good marriage. It has its problems. There's no gainsaying that. It's got its pros and its cons, but generally it's worked very well. And it's also been the one thing that has not allowed the government to, and they've tried, to paint Right2Know as something that was brought in from outside, funded from outside, a kind of tool for regime change, etc. We've had those accusations, but we've been able to counter them very effectively. And we've been able to mobilize large numbers of people. So, we grew from opposing the secrecy bill, and I think that was possibly, and remains to this day, probably our most successful policy input. Every time the Committee on the Protection of Information bill met in Parliament, Right2Know activists were there in the public gallery. I don't know if any of you remember about 3 or 4 years ago when Siyabonga Cwele was the minister and was making some very rash, largely uninformed statements about the bill in the media. Right2Know activists got together masks of him and sat in the public gallery wearing those masks. So we did some pretty cheeky things as well. We would protest outside Parliament at the opening of Parliament, at the Union buildings, at Constitution Hill, anywhere the minister or the Director General was talking or going to give some input, we were there. We used the National Key Points, and that's another one of our areas of interest, is to oppose the National Key Points Act, because some of those national key points ought not to be national key points. Okay, so we would go and protest outside the SABC, etc. We did a lot of that, and in doing that, we found that within the Right2Know, there was, as I said, also this big elephant in the room of the right to protest. And FXI particularly, and to a lesser extent SAHA and some of our other partners, had already experienced this, the AIDC in Cape Town, that firstly, communities didn't always know that they had the right to protest. Some of them were protesting because of frustration, etc. Okay. But they didn't know that there was a legitimate, constitutionally recognized right to peaceful protest. Okay. and they didn't know how to go about using that right. So one of the things we did then was we started talking to communities about how to protest. How to protest legally. Okay, and we came up with a handbook. I said to some of your administrators and directors, etc. here, I had a basket of Right2Know leaflets and booklets and publications that I was unable to bring because it's been stolen, believe it or not. But my garden tools were on top of it, so maybe it was the garden tools that were the attraction. But I will drop off some next week, sometime next week, for you. So there are bumper stickers in there, there are little handbooks, and amongst those little handbooks is a handbook on the right to protest. Okay. It was adapted from an FXI one. Yes. Do you want one of those?
Yes, yes.
Good. Okay. And so we started saying to people, this is how you can protest. You want to organize a big event, a big march, you've got to get permission for it. This is how you go about getting the permission. This is how you fill the form in to get the permission. No, you do not have to pay. Many local police stations started asking people to pay fees to get that form protest. There is no such thing. So, so when they put that, one police station actually had a notice up that in order to get what we call a Regulation of Gatherings Act form processed, okay, they had to pay 150 Rand or 250 Rand. They had it in the police station. Our activists took pictures of that and we publicized it. Okay, cell phones are useful. Okay, so you basically, and then not only do we start educating communities, but then some of our activists who got arrested illegally started educating their prison warders and the police, when they were held in police cells, telling the police, actually, according to Section 17 of the Constitution, blah, 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 blah. Okay. And then we started holding meetings with the police, up to the level of the provincial and then the national commissioners, to sort of say, well, our activists are being harassed. They're not being allowed to protest. The police don't know that you don't need. By the way, this is a very good tip. If ever you want to protest anything, you do not need official permission to organize a picket of less than 15 people. How many of you knew that? You did. You did. Less than 15 people, you don't need permission. You can go and picket about anything, anywhere with less than 15 people. And provided they're about 300 or 400 meters away from the next group, you can have several groups of 15 people. And as long as that protest remains peaceful, that picket remains peaceful, they can't do anything. We have picketed outside the SABC. We have picketed outside Lutuli House. We have picketed at the union buildings. We have picketed at Parliament and at a variety of other places, at the headquarters of some very nefarious companies, including the telecoms companies. Okay, so a picket is simple to organize. You just need a few placards, maybe some things to hand out to people, because motorists will look at you if you're on a street corner, or passers-by pedestrians will kind of want to know what this is about. And as long as you're within that under 15 number, and you're not within too close proximity of the next group of picketers, go for it. Okay. Am I being seditious here?
Yes, you like it.
Okay, so those were the kinds of things that Right2Know got involved in almost peripherally around starting up with that secrecy. And again, I think we've made some important policy inputs there, because we're now having the National Commissioner and as I said, the provincial commissioners talking to us about proposed new legislation, about a proposed code of conduct for their members, and how to educate police personnel on issues such as these. Okay. So I think that's a gain. It means that our policing services are coming out of the mindset of pre-94, where they were there to surveil and they were there to limit. And they're starting to get into this mindset of, we're actually there to protect, not ourselves, not the buildings, but the population. Okay. It's going to take time. It's not something that will happen Certainly not overnight, and not even in a year or 2 years or 5 years, but we'll get there. We're 5 years old now. We were 5 years old in August last year. And I think for something that started as a very small organization, we grew very fast, very quickly. So the right to protest is one. I also spoke about the right to communicate. What do we mean by the right to communicate? Anybody know about our right to communicate leg? So several legs of the program now. And you can find all of this online, but as I said, I'll drop off some information for you as well. We started to notice that as a group of activists, those that were relatively better educated amongst us and relatively more wealthy, none of us are very wealthy, unfortunately, okay, but relatively better off financially in socioeconomic terms, were actually able to communicate with each other far more cheaply and easily than those who weren't. And we concluded that this was largely because of the fact that telecommunications companies, especially the mobile telecoms companies, were making huge profits on things like SMS. And because the government was at the time being reluctant to roll out Wi-Fi hotspots, access to sort of internet in various forms from schools into communities upwards, okay? And so we decided that this needed to be addressed, and we commissioned some research which found that in, I think, some cases, the telecoms companies were making something like a 3,000% profit on SMS and on prepaid. SMS was definitely about in the sort of ballpark of 3,000%. Now, to most of us here, to those of you who get a stipend here, okay, an SMS at 150, how much do they cost now? I don't even know. Because I don't use SMS enough.
WhatsApp depends.
No, not WhatsApp. SMS, like text messaging. Okay, but it's, I think the 75 cents.
Yeah.
At the time, it was about 1 rand 50 or 2 rand. Okay, so, you know, and it really literally costs the telecoms company something in the region of, I stand open to correction here, the figures are on our website, but 0.09 cents or something like that. Really, so it's ludicrous, the profits that were being made. Okay. And we said that if we are campaigning for people to have the right to know, to have access to information, and to share that information, they can't access or share that information if communication costs are so high. Mm-hmm. One of the other things that informed the Right to Communicate programs, leg of our program, of our organization, was also the fact that in neighboring countries, South African telecoms providers or companies that had a South African head office or holding, okay, were actually limiting the right to protest by switching off, for example, SMS enabling during certain times. So for example, in 2010, there were food riots in Mozambique. I don't know if any of you remembers that. Okay. What the South African holding, or the company that was held by a South African holding company did, on the instructions of government, was to switch off for prepaid users only SMS capability for about 48 hours. And those organizers of those protests were communicating primarily via SMS. Okay. We've seen similar things happen in Swaziland. We've seen similar things happen in Zimbabwe, even though in the Zimbabwe case it's not a South African company. Zimbabwe, prior to elections, the Zimbabwe Election Support Network, which is an NGO, was arranging to have activists go to nearly every polling station in the country and basically sit there and tick off as people voted and came out, more or less what the count was going to be. So, because in the past what the government has done is even in areas where the opposition has a big majority, they have claimed that the government won, that ZANU-PF won. Okay, so what they did there, again, suddenly no SMS capability, no way for these activists to be communicating with each other. And then, of course, the whole issue of voice over internet protocol and internet-enabled communication, such as WhatsApp, coming to you in a second, such as WhatsApp, etc., was the other leg of that. So we commissioned some research, we did some focus groups with people in communities, and again, that information was conducted by an institute allied to WITS for us, paid for research. It was launched last year. I will bring some of those publications through, and you can read through them. And you know, on the surface of them, some of the things that people say in focus groups about how much it costs them to operate their cell phones and what they use their cell phones for, and how much of their monthly budget goes towards keeping and using a cell phone. They might seem on the surface to be very shallow things. They're not. Read them carefully. Because they really, really either enable people to communicate and thereby to get information and to protest when necessary, etc., or they limit people from doing that. So it seems like, you know, we were asking simple questions. The question is very simple because we were talking to people who were not necessarily well educated, etc. And we were trying to talk to people in their own languages, etc., etc., and to get them to discuss these things. But really, that research, I believe, will in the future prove to have been very groundbreaking. You had a question, comment? Sorry. Pre-election. Oh, yeah. Kill them, disappear them, torture them, yes. And it's not unknown here either. It's much more covered, but it's not unknown. So that actually brings me very neatly. The lady over there was saying that someone she employed from Zimbabwe was telling her how the government in Zimbabwe during election cycles, pre-election periods, would pay the phone companies to monitor people's communications, their text messages, etc. By the way, if you download the new WhatsApp messaging, all your messages have end-to-end encryption if the person on the other end also has the same version. Okay, so real breakthrough there. Okay, so that's another leg, and a fairly new leg of our campaign is the issue of government surveillance. Okay, it's of course part of the whole secrecy thing, but the fact that government is surveilling and censoring, in some instances, private communications is of huge, huge importance. The fact that they're keeping metadata, what is called metadata, about all telecommunications, email communications, text messages, and supposedly also internet-enabled messaging systems like WhatsApp, hopefully not now, Facebook Messenger certainly, is of huge interest because firstly, it's, in my opinion, a huge waste of time and resources. Okay? We're not a country that's currently under, or even potentially in the short to medium term, under threat of terrorist attack or anything like that, for them to be able to justify such widespread surveillance of that nature. And in most countries where that surveillance happens, it's supposed to happen only on the orders of a judge and only for a limited period of time, and it's supposed to be made known to the individual or individuals who are being surveilled after a specific time has elapsed. And none of that is happening. Okay. So that's a huge new area for us that we've just commissioned some research into. It's just been put up on our website. It's an area that the UN Human Rights Committee also took the South African government to task on quite recently. Again, all that information is on our website. And it's certainly an area that you as activists or policymakers, whether it's in government or outside, should be concerned about. Because you have a right to privacy.
I think a lot of the government's paranoia comes because like there's this conspiracy theory that they have that the U.S. is trying to overthrow them. So that's why you had like the Fees Must Fall protests, where there were talks of there being a third force, and there were WhatsApp voice notes which were sent to national intelligence, where the government was like, okay, fine, people are actually trying to overthrow me. Because I remember like in one of the voice notes, somebody was talking about how they're going to stage a sit-in at JC, I think, and then how they're planning to, I'm not sure which part of the Middle East overthrew their government, and now how they're trying to enact that here. So obviously that heightened government paranoia. That heightened government paranoia, which is why you have like, even with protests, student protests, you have like a lot of people who are sent in or who are placed in protests on behalf of the government to monitor about how things are happening. And also, I was actually very worried about the fact that, you know, like these telephone companies, they call you sometimes, and then they say things which should only be personal information. Like,
really?
Yeah, like they will be like, okay, we know that you're not married. We know that you're not married, and we know that you get an income. Are you interested in life insurance? How did you do that?
I have to say that a lot of the people we do voluntarily provide information to sometimes sell that information on. So you need to read the fine print.
But isn't Dr. brokeraging illegal in South Africa?
Yes, unless they have, quite a few of them have in the fine print that they will share this information with partners who may contact you with offers based on your interests. And sometimes even when it's not in the fine print, somebody at the company illegally does it anyway. Okay. I know this is true because I'll give you an example. About 8 years ago, I had 3 attempted break-ins at my house within a 2-week period. And so I was like living in fear. And my sister and her husband came up from Durban for the weekend, and her husband, while I was at work, I say for the weekend, but long weekend. While I was at work, he contacted a security company and asked them to come and give us a quote to, put an alarm system in, etc. Now he did that under his name. So for about 3 years, this company kept referring to me as Miss Muhammad. That's his surname, my brother-in-law's surname. Okay. And then I would get phone calls and emails from people who would ask for Miss Muhammad. And at one stage I got so irritated, I called ADT's head office, because it was ADT was the company. And I said, people in your company, if you're not doing it yourself, people in your company are selling my information on, and that's illegal. I didn't agree to that. And that's when somebody said to me, well, depends on what you signed. You need to go back and look at the fine print. And lo and behold, in the fine print of many contracts, it's there. I hereby give the right to ADT or whatever the company is. I'm not saying it is ADT, okay, but some companies have that, to share information with partners who may bring to your attention or publicize to you offers that may be of interest to you based on your interests that you've indicated in this questionnaire or whatever. Very, very sneaky.
What about the issue of the secret SIM cards and the cameras, more especially in the Samsung telephones?
Secret SIM cards?
Yeah.
Don't know about that. Tell me.
I think it's found inside the battery.
Yes.
Just inside the battery.
Inside the battery?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. If you can open the battery.
Yes.
Yeah. The secret SIM card.
Uh-huh.
And right on top here, there's sort of a camera. And I think it records everything we do, everywhere we go.
Anybody else heard of that? It's the first time I'm hearing of it, but I'll pass it on to our surveillance people. Has anyone else ever heard of this? I'll try and find out and get back to you.
I don't
Never heard of it, but if it's true, it's scary. I wouldn't put it past them, but yeah. And it depends on what it's able to capture, if there is such a service.
Yeah.
You just made me think about things like, what's that online bookstore?
Amazon.
Yeah, and their tracking of your internet history, and that's how they predict.
Yes.
Like,
Your internet history is another
Yeah,
place
so
that
is
people
that-
get your so-called interests and areas of thematic areas of focus from. And
is
then you
that
get,
legal here?
sorry?
Is that legal in South Africa?
It's currently legal here. It's one of the issues that came up in the Film and Publication Board hearings on the proposed internet bill that they wanted to pass last year. Okay, which was again just a sort of another excuse for government to monitor what we do on the net in many respects. But it was one of the things that came up that, actually we're trying to protect people from being deluged with things that are apparently targeted at them. I think, again, it's a question of becoming a little bit more savvy, of becoming a little bit more aware of anything you agree to. When you agree to go to a site, they tell you they use cookies and they collect information on your interests, etc. You, in many cases, may need to make a decision. Do I really need the information from the site? Can I get it elsewhere? Is there an opt-out clause and can I still get the information? You need to really we need to up our game as citizens and as organizations. And as to how we go about using those sites, and especially sites that are not very secure, that might provide potential for hackers to get things like banking information.
In addition to that, some countries in the Gulf, more especially the governments, they're now operating their top secrets through any media. They rather use the letters to go straight here, the old, just because of
I've heard some of this, but there are ways of encrypting your communication. Before this new WhatsApp version, there was, I don't know how many of you have ever used Signal.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Was that the Russian one?
Yes. Yeah. So there are ways of encrypting your communication. I don't think any method is 100% secure, but certainly some are very, very secure. So if you want to secure the way you send emails, even the way you use internet browsers, you can now go incognito on Google Chrome and quite a few other, Firefox as well, I think. I'm not so sure about Explorer because I don't use it much. But whatever platforms you use regularly, go and research what the security options are, is what I would say. So we've gotten away from RTK, but that's okay. It's still part of our work.
What Topalak mentioned made me think of a conversation that I heard on one of these tech shows. It's
Yes.
called Nights on Media.
Yes, I know it.
And then they said there that the future of Google is going in a direction where you can actually just go onto Google and Google will predict what you want to search. You
Yes.
just enter one letter.
It already does that.
It already
does
does
that.
that, but not to a large extent. You maybe have like 2 words and then it will complete it. But in the future, you just literally go onto Google.
It will know your preferences so well.
Yeah.
So it's scary.
But don't you think it can help with terminating conflicts? Actually, like I know with the Oscar Pistorius case, they were able to look at his chat history, deleted chat history of the conversations that he had with his girlfriend.
Yes.
So maybe it can be used as an advantage that is not so much.
I think there's a case to be made for its use in criminal prosecution and criminal investigation, but I think that should be limited quite narrowly, and that it should only be available on the order of a judge or somebody in the judiciary, because I think that's the exception rather than the rule. And yes, of course, there is a case to be made for it, and I'm not at all advocating that it shouldn't be a tool that the police and investigators, etc., can access. But then I would say that that's probably the case also with, however encrypted your communication is, there's probably a way to decrypt it Okay. And in the case of a criminal investigation, I would say, well, I don't think most people would have an issue with it, provided there was sufficient substantial basis to say, well, we believe that Mr. Pistorius, wrote incriminating stuff in the emails of the 5 days leading up to Riva's death, or the text message. I've got 5 minutes. Okay.
Seeing that you've got 5 minutes, how do we become, maybe in instance where I wanted to volunteer for Right2Know?
It's open to everybody.
So maybe just a bit of information on that.
Okay. How Right2Know operates, we have provincial secretariats in 3 provinces at present. We've tried to set them up in other provinces. So if your home provinces are not Gauteng, Western Cape, or KwaZulu-Natal, and you're interested in setting up a Right2Know branch or movement in your province, talk to us, please. Okay. So we operate formally in 3 provinces and then less formally in all of the others. So we will go and travel to Mpumalanga or Northwest or Northern Province from Gauteng. Some of our activists will go into Eastern Cape from KwaZulu-Natal or Free State from KwaZulu-Natal, etc., etc. Northern Cape from the Western Cape, etc. Okay, we have a monthly, what we call the Gauteng Working Group meeting. It's held on the first Monday of every month, so we've just had one, but I didn't go to this month because I was at Shirish Nanabai's funeral. If you don't know who Shirish Nanabai is, you should Google him. Somebody who could be a model for all of us. Okay, so he's an MK vet. All right, so I didn't go to this month, which was on Monday. It's held between 10 o'clock and 1 o'clock. Okay, every first Monday of every month, unless there's a reason to move it from that date. Okay, like a public holiday or a big event coming up. But generally, we stick to that. Okay, and it's held in central Johannesburg in Newtown at Civicus House. Okay. In the boardroom at Civicus. So if you want to attend our meetings, please be our guest. You'd be very welcome. We welcome individuals and we welcome people affiliated to organizations as well. So whether you're representing yourself or you're representing your organization, you're very welcome to attend. We then have people from the Gauteng Working Group who are specifically tasked with doing certain things. A few of them are paid, most of us are not. Okay? So we have, for example, a provincial organizer who is paid. Okay? We then have people on working groups such as the Media Diversity Group or the Access to Information Group or the Right to Protest Group, etc. Okay? And those subgroups report back to our working group what they've done and what they've been doing, what they want to do over the next, what they've done over the past month and want to do over the next month. That's how we operate. Okay. That's just a very kind of basic structure. We then have a monthly national working group. So representatives from each provincial working group teleconference once a month. And once a year we have a provincial summit in each of the 3 provinces. Okay. And delegates from the provincial summit attend the national summit, which is also once a year. So it's a very, very flat structure. Okay. We, of course, have to have somebody who kind of is the spokesperson in each province, a national spokesperson, who's on the various task groups, etc. We've got organizers for certain things, so people who organize specifically on media issues, people who organize specifically on communication issues, people who organize specifically on protest issues and on information issues. Okay. And we, at our monthly working group meetings, the provincial working group meetings, we basically take requests from all present to conduct workshops, training, education initiatives, help with marches, pickets, strikes, etc. And we take those decisions collectively so that we, I think, generally have a very broad consensus that these are the things that need to be prioritized for the next month or the next 3 months or whatever. And similarly, we have a code of conduct for our activists, and activists who don't abide by that code of conduct may be disciplined and may be asked to leave. Okay, rarely happens, but it does happen. There are always, I think, in movements of the sort attempts to hijack agendas, unfortunately. Or people wanting to bring party politics. And so our big thing, we're not affiliated with any party political organization. So you may be a member of the ANC, and you may be a member of the EFF, and you may be a member of the DA, and you can come to the Gauteng Working Group meetings in your personal or organizational capacity, but you may not mobilize on a party political basis. I hope that's kind of given you a bit of an overview. I will bring the information. There's a lot more I could say. We're very much a participatory democracy organization. We're constitutionally based. We're based on the values of the Constitution. There are 10 principles that we operate by. Go have a look at them on our website. If you're interested in any specific leg of the program, please contact me. I'll put my contact details, if I may.
Yes.
And if you're not getting a response to an email, just send me a text message or a WhatsApp, and I'll either respond or put you, well, I will respond, but quite often I will put you in touch with the person that is most able to help you within our organization. Okay. Please don't publicize my details.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. On the behalf of the History Fellows, I'd like you to thank you so much for coming out here. Your passion for the work that you do, for the activation and recognition of rights is admirable and inspiring. So yes, thank you for sharing.
It's so interactive, and really, I'm not just putting that out there, I'm actually inviting you to get in touch with us and become involved. And there may also be, I believe you have externships after your 6 months here. If people are interested in working with Right2Know or with one of two of our national organizers on specific issues are actually based here in Gauteng. And we could do with the help.
Thank you.
Sorry it was so informal and off the